Death row transfers. The prison transport system that leaves no record. Most people think death row inmates never move. But they do. And when they're transferred, it doesn't happen during the day. There's no public schedule, no announcement, and often, no record that it happened at all. Unmarked vehicles, empty highways, paperwork that appears days or weeks later. These transfers aren't designed for safety. They're designed for silence. Tonight, we're exposing the prison transport system used to move death row inmates without a trace. Before we begin, tap like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us uncover the darkest corners of the prison system. Now let's step inside. Most people imagine death row as a place of permanent stillness, a final destination. Once an inmate arrives, the assumption is that nothing changes anymore. No movement, no transfers, no disruption. A cell becomes a fixed endpoint, a waiting room for an execution date that may be years or decades away. That assumption is wrong. Death row inmates move more than the public realizes. Not frequently, not predictably, and not transparently, but they do move. And the reasons they are moved are never explained in a single policy, memo, or public statement. Instead, the logic of death row transfers exists across fragments of administrative language, risk management protocols, legal contingencies, and institutional self-preservation. To understand why these transfers happen at all, you have to understand how the prison system thinks, not how it explains itself, but how it operates when no one is watching. At its core, the modern prison system is not built around punishment alone. It is built around control, liability reduction, and operational stability. Every decision, especially those involving death row inmates, flows through those priorities. Transfers are not exceptions to the system. They are tools within it. The myth of permanence. The idea that death row inmates never move comes from the way death row is presented publicly. Courtrooms, news coverage, and official statements frame death row as a fixed location, a unit, a wing, or an entire prison designated for condemned inmates. This framing is deliberate. Permanence reassures the public. It suggests order, finality, and containment. But inside corrections administration, permanence is a liability. Facilities age, staffing changes, court rulings intervene, medical needs escalate, security classifications evolve. The system cannot afford to lock itself into immobility, especially when dealing with inmates who carry the highest legal, political, and emotional stakes. Death row is not a single place. It is a classification, and classifications can be reassigned. Legal pressure is a driver. One of the most common, but least visible, reasons for death row transfers is legal pressure. Appeals, evidentiary hearings, resentencing procedures, and competency evaluations frequently require an inmate to be closer to a specific court, hospital, or evaluation center. These requirements do not always appear dramatic in court filings. Often, they are described as routine procedural necessities. But inside the prison system, each legal obligation introduces risk. Transporting a death row inmate to a courthouse or hospital increases exposure to the public, to media, to protest, and to unpredictable variables. To minimize that exposure, departments often consolidate inmates temporarily at facilities better equipped for legal processing. These facilities may not be publicly labeled as death row units, even though they temporarily house condemned prisoners. The transfer itself becomes an administrative solution to a legal inconvenience. Importantly, these movements are not framed as death row transfers in paperwork. They are often classified under neutral terms such as temporary relocation, administrative movement, or secure reassignment. The language avoids permanence. It avoids attention, and it avoids triggering public scrutiny. Facility capacity and institutional stress. Prisons are not static environments. They operate under constant strain, overcrowding, understaffing, aging infrastructure, and shifting security demands. Death row units, in particular, are expensive to operate. They require higher staffing ratios, specialized training, and enhanced security protocols. When a facility begins to buckle under operational pressure, administrators look for relief valves. Transfers are one of them. If a death row unit experiences staff shortages, construction issues, or internal security incidents, moving inmates, even temporarily, can stabilize the system. From the outside, nothing appears to change. Death row still exists. The system still functions. But internally, pieces are being rearranged to prevent failure. These decisions are rarely framed as responses to weakness. Instead, they are presented as routine logistical adjustments. The public is not informed because, in the system's view, the public does not need to know. Medical risk and quiet relocation. As death row inmates age, medical risk becomes unavoidable. Chronic illness, mental health deterioration, and emergency care needs increase dramatically. Not all death row facilities are equipped to handle advanced medical treatment. Transporting inmates repeatedly to outside hospitals creates visibility and risk. The quieter solution is relocation. Inmates may be transferred to facilities with specialized medical units under classifications that obscure their death row status. On paper, the movement is medical. In practice, it is also about containment and control. The fewer times an inmate leaves a secure environment, the fewer chances there are for complications. These medical transfers often involve the highest level of secrecy. Vehicles may be unmarked. Schedules may change at the last minute. Even internal staff may be informed only hours before the movement occurs. The goal is not efficiency, it is unpredictability. Unpredictability reduces risk. Behavioral classification and administrative reassignment. Another driver of death row transfers is behavioral classification. While death row inmates are already at the highest security level, behavior still matters. Inmates who become difficult to manage, whether through litigation, refusal to comply, or perceived influence over others, may be moved to isolate that influence. This is not framed as punishment. It is framed as management. Administrators do not want clusters of inmates who share grievances, legal strategies, or communication channels. Transfers disrupt patterns. They break familiarity. They reset dynamics. From the system's perspective, this is preventative maintenance. The inmate may not be told why the transfer is happening. Often, neither are the guards tasked with escorting them. The decision exists above the level of explanation. Political sensitivity and public optics. Death row is politically sensitive. Executions attract attention. Transfers, if noticed, raise questions. Departments of corrections work carefully to manage optics, especially in high-profile cases. If an inmate's case gains media traction, moving them quietly can reduce exposure. This is especially true during periods of public controversy, moratorium debates, wrongful conviction coverage, or election cycles. Visibility becomes a liability. Silence becomes strategy. Transfers conducted at night, through back routes, with minimal documentation are not about drama. They are about avoiding the creation of a story. No story means no pressure. Why the public is never told. The absence of public information about death row transfers is not an oversight. It is a structural choice. Transparency invites questions. Questions invite accountability. Accountability introduces risk. Corrections departments are not incentivized to explain movements that the public has never demanded to understand. As long as executions occur, or are perceived to occur, within the bounds of the law, the mechanisms behind them remain out of sight. Transfers exist in that blind spot. They are not hidden because they are illegal. They are hidden because they are inconvenient to explain. The first layer of silence. By the end of this chapter, one thing should be clear: death row transfers are not anomalies. If Chapter 1 explained why death row transfers exist, this chapter explains how they actually happen, and why the process looks nothing like what most people imagine. There is no single blueprint for transporting a death row inmate. No standardized route. No universally applied checklist that the public could point to and understand. What exists instead is a deliberately flexible system, one designed to adapt on the fly, obscure its own patterns, and minimize predictability at every level. The transport process is not meant to be efficient. It is meant to be controlled. From the moment a transfer is authorized, the logic shifts away from transparency and toward containment. Authorization without visibility. A death row transfer does not begin with an announcement. It begins with authorization that may never pass through public-facing channels. The approval can originate from different sources: central administration, legal divisions, security command, or medical authorities. But once it is granted, the process narrows quickly. Information is compartmentalized. Only those who need to know are told, and even then, they are rarely told more than what is required to perform their specific role. A transport officer may know the pickup time, but not the destination. A receiving facility may know an inmate is arriving, but not the route taken. Even unit-level staff may receive notice only hours before the inmate is removed from their cell. This fragmentation is intentional. It reduces the chance of leaks, errors, or resistance. No single person sees the whole picture. Timing as a control mechanism. Most death row transfers occur outside normal hours. Late night and early morning movements are preferred, not because they are convenient, but because they reduce exposure. Fewer staff, fewer vehicles, fewer civilians, fewer variables. Timing is not fixed until the last possible moment. Schedules may change repeatedly in the days leading up to a transfer. An inmate may be told nothing until minutes before movement. In some cases, they are informed only after restraints are applied. This uncertainty is not accidental. Predictability creates vulnerability. The system avoids it. Removal from the cell. The physical process begins quietly. No announcements. No visible preparation. The cell door opens, often without explanation beyond a simple command to comply. The inmate is instructed to step out, submit to restraints, and remain silent. Restraints are layered. Wrist restraints, waist chains, leg irons. The configuration depends on policy, distance, and perceived risk, but the effect is the same: limited movement, restricted balance, and complete dependence on escorts. The inmate is not allowed to gather personal belongings beyond what is approved in advance, if anything at all. Many transfers are conducted with no personal property accompanying the inmate. Property is moved separately, delayed, or temporarily stored. This separation reinforces the sense that the transfer is not a relocation, but a suspension. Escort composition and roles. Death row transports are rarely conducted by a single agency or uniformed group. Escort teams are often mixed: transport officers, supervisory staff, and sometimes external security personnel. Roles are assigned narrowly. One officer watches movement. Another watches restraints. Another watches surroundings. Conversation is minimal. Instructions are procedural, not explanatory. The goal is coordination without discussion. Importantly, escorts are trained not to engage with the inmate beyond necessary commands. This is not hostility. It is protocol. Engagement introduces unpredictability. Silence maintains control. Vehicles without identity. The vehicles used in death row transfers are chosen for anonymity, not intimidation. They are often unmarked or generically marked. Vans, SUVs, or transport buses that blend into ordinary traffic. The absence of obvious prison markings is deliberate. Visibility creates questions. Questions create records. Inside the vehicle, the environment is controlled to reduce sensory input. Windows may be obscured. Seating restricts movement. The inmate is positioned to minimize visual awareness of direction or landmarks. The goal is not comfort. It is disorientation. Routes designed to confuse. Routes are rarely direct. Transport paths may change unexpectedly, detour without explanation, or include pauses at secure locations. These stops are not documented in a way the inmate can access or understand. The effect is cumulative. Without visual reference points, time becomes unreliable. Minutes stretch. Hours compress. The inmate cannot tell how far they have traveled or where they are in relation to where they started. This is not accidental inefficiency. It is strategic uncertainty. Communication blackout. During transport, communication with the outside world is non-existent. No phone calls. No notifications. No updates to family or legal counsel until after arrival, if at all. Even internal communication is limited. Escort teams report status, not narrative. Location updates are functional, not descriptive. The fewer words exchanged, the fewer details exist to be recorded. The inmate exists in a gap, physically present, administratively moving, but socially absent. Arrival without context. Arrival at the receiving facility does not resolve uncertainty. The inmate may not be told where they are. Processing is conducted quietly, often through secure entrances away from public view. Identification is verified. Restraints are adjusted. Documentation is signed, but not explained. If the transfer is temporary, the inmate may not be informed of its duration. If it is permanent, that may not be made clear either. The system does not prioritize clarity. Clarity empowers questions. Questions complicate control. Paperwork that trails the body. One of the most misunderstood aspects of death row transport is documentation timing. Contrary to public assumption, paperwork does not always precede movement. In many cases, records follow later, sometimes days later. This lag is not an error. It allows flexibility. If circumstances change mid-transfer, the record can be adjusted. If a movement draws attention, details can be minimized. The paper trail is shaped after the fact. The body moves first. The record catches up later. The role of routine in normalizing silence. For staff involved in repeated transports, this process becomes routine. Routine dulls ethical friction. What might seem extraordinary to an outsider becomes procedural to those inside the system. Silence becomes habit. This normalization is one of the system's most powerful features. When extraordinary actions feel ordinary, they stop attracting scrutiny. Why the process feels invisible. Every element of the transport process is designed to minimize footprint. No announcements. No visible convoys. No consistent patterns. Each decision reduces the chance that anyone outside the system will notice movement at all. If no one sees it, no one asks about it. If no one asks, no explanation is required. This is how the system sustains itself. The psychological impact of movement. For the inmate, the transport process is not just physical relocation. It is psychological compression. Time disappears. Space becomes abstract. Authority feels absolute. Even inmates who have experienced multiple transfers describe each one as destabilizing. Familiarity with the process does not reduce its effect. In some ways, it intensifies it. Knowing that silence will follow does not make silence easier to endure. The system does not acknowledge this impact. For the prison system, a death row transfer is an administrative operation. For the inmate inside it, the experience is something else entirely. It is not simply relocation. It is a controlled interruption of certainty, an engineered period where time, space, and agency are deliberately blurred. Once restraints are applied and the cell door closes, the inmate exits the familiar structure of prison life. Even on death row, routine exists. Sounds repeat. Schedules are predictable. Movement follows patterns. Transport removes all of that at once. What replaces it is absence. The first psychological break. The transition begins immediately. Secure corridors sound different from housing units. Footsteps echo longer. Doors seal heavier. Elevators compress space and distort the sense of movement. Escort commands are minimal and procedural, often delivered without eye contact. The inmate may be instructed to keep their head down, face forward, or remain still. Even when vision is not physically obstructed, observation is discouraged through posture, restraint positioning, and pace. There is no opportunity to orient. This is not about punishment. It is about severing familiarity. The inmate understands they are moving, but not where they are going, how long it will take, or what will happen next. That uncertainty begins accumulating immediately, before the vehicle is even reached. Restraints beyond security. Restraints are applied for safety, but their psychological role is just as important. Wrist restraints limit precision. Waist chains pull posture forward. Leg irons shorten stride and destabilize balance. Movement becomes conscious and effortful. This sustained physical awareness narrows mental focus. Attention shifts inward, toward posture, pain, circulation, and coordination. Thought compresses. There is less space for planning, questioning, or resistance. During longer transports, numbness sets in. Muscles tighten. Joints ache. These sensations anchor the inmate to the present moment while stripping away any broader sense of control. The system does not describe this as psychological pressure, but the effect is consistent. Silence as the environment. Silence during transport is rarely ordered. It is enforced structurally. Escorts do not converse. Radios are used sparingly. Communication is limited to short, functional commands. Step, stop, sit. Questions from the inmate are ignored, deflected, or met with non-response. Not as punishment, but because engagement introduces unpredictability. Silence preserves control. Over time, silence becomes heavy. Without feedback, the inmate cannot confirm assumptions or test reality. Silence becomes a vacuum where speculation fills the space left by information. Time without reference. One of the most destabilizing aspects of transfer is the loss of time awareness. Watches are prohibited. Clocks are absent. Windows are obscured or positioned beyond use. Without routine markers, time loses shape. Minutes stretch. Hours blur. Attempts to count internally fail under stress and fatigue. The inmate knows time is passing, but cannot measure it. This temporal uncertainty erodes psychological stability. Humans rely on time to anchor experience. When that anchor disappears, vulnerability increases. The system does not need to accelerate or delay the transfer to produce this effect. Uncertainty alone is sufficient. Disorientation without force. The transport process does not rely on overt violence. There are no raised voices, no visible threats. Disorientation does the work instead. Routes change without explanation. Vehicles stop and idle. Secure pauses occur in locations the inmate cannot identify. Each shift forces the mind to update an internal map that can never be completed. Where am I now? How far have I gone? How long has this lasted? With no answers available, the mind eventually stops asking. This is not surrender, it is adaptation. The power of not knowing the destination. In many transfers, inmates are not told where they are going. This is deliberate. A known destination allows anticipation. Anticipation allows preparation. Preparation restores a degree of control. Without a destination, the experience remains suspended. The inmate cannot imagine arrival, cannot rehearse the next environment, and cannot brace for what follows. This suspension increases compliance. A person who does not know what they are approaching is less likely to resist moving toward it. Isolation within proximity. Despite being physically surrounded by officers, the inmate is functionally isolated. There is no dialogue, no acknowledgement beyond procedure, no shared narrative. This isolation is distinct from solitary confinement. In solitary, the inmate is alone in space. During transport, they are alone in awareness. This produces a specific psychological effect: invisibility. Seen, but not recognized. Present, but not engaged. Over time, this erodes self-perception and reinforces power imbalance. The body as the only anchor. As uncertainty increases, attention narrows further toward physical sensation. The pressure of restraints, the vibration of the vehicle, temperature changes, engine noise. These sensations become anchors. They confirm existence, but provide no information. I am here. I am restrained. I am moving, or I am not. This minimal awareness is the psychological baseline the system enforces. Arrival without resolution. Arrival does not restore certainty. Processing is conducted quietly, often through secure entrances. Identification is verified. Paperwork is signed. Explanations are minimal or absent. The inmate may not be told where they are or how long they will remain. Sometimes that information arrives days later through indirect cues or delayed documentation. Sometimes it never arrives clearly at all. Arrival is not an answer. It is another controlled transition. Emotional compression and aftereffects. Transport compresses emotional experience. Fear, vigilance, resignation, and anticipation coexist without release. There is no outlet, no closure. After transfers, inmates often report lingering anxiety, disrupted sleep, and difficulty re-establishing routine. These effects are not tracked or acknowledged. They are considered incidental, despite being predictable. Why the system relies on this experience? Disoriented individuals are easier to manage. Uncertain individuals are less likely to challenge authority. Transfers reset psychological footing. They disrupt familiarity and reinforce hierarchy. The system does not articulate this logic. It does not need to. It operates on it. The message without words. Even without explanation, the transfer delivers a clear message. Movement can happen at any time, without notice and without your consent. This knowledge reshapes behavior. Speech narrows. Expectations lower. Compliance increases. The inmate has not simply changed location. They have passed through a period of enforced uncertainty designed to reinforce control. And that effect does not end when the restraints come off. When people hear that death row inmates are sometimes moved without a trace, the phrase is often misunderstood. It conjures images of deleted files, secret orders, or illegal actions deliberately hidden from the public. That assumption misunderstands how modern prison systems actually operate. Nothing has to be erased for something to disappear. Invisibility inside the correctional system is rarely created through secrecy. It is created through administration, through how records are structured, when they are generated, what they are required to contain, and, most importantly, what they are not required to explain. The absence of a clear trail is not a mistake. It is the predictable outcome of a system designed to document compliance, not transparency. To understand why death row transfers leave so little trace, it is necessary to understand how paperwork functions inside prisons, not as a historical record, but as a risk management tool. The illusion of comprehensive records. From the outside, it is easy to assume that prisons maintain a complete, unified file for every inmate. A record that shows where they are, where they have been, and why they were moved. That assumption feels reasonable. It is also incorrect. No single document exists that narrates an inmate's movement from start to finish. Instead, information is spread across multiple systems, each with a narrow purpose. Classification databases, housing rosters, transport unit logs, medical records, legal filings, intake and release forms. Each system records what it needs to function. None are designed to explain context. None are responsible for assembling a complete story. A death row transfer does not exist as a single event on paper. It exists as disconnected entries that only make sense when viewed together, something the system itself never requires anyone to do. Authorization that permits, not explains. When a death row transfer is approved, the authorization rarely contains a detailed justification. It does not explain reasoning in plain language. It does not describe risk assessments or alternatives considered. It exists for one purpose: to permit movement. The language used is intentionally broad. Administrative reassignment, security necessity, temporary relocation, medical transport. These phrases are not inaccurate. They are incomplete. Broad language protects flexibility. It allows administrators to act without locking themselves into explanations that could later be challenged. Specific reasoning increases liability. General language reduces it. In many cases, authorization does not even exist as a single, clearly traceable document. Approval may be routed through internal communication, verbal confirmation, or provisional sign-off that generates minimal paperwork. This is especially true when timing, security, or discretion is prioritized. The system is designed to move first and document later. Timing is where visibility breaks down. One of the least understood aspects of prison administration is when documentation occurs. The public often assumes that records are completed before an action takes place. In reality, documentation frequently follows the event. Transport logs may be completed after arrival. Classification updates may appear days later. Medical notes may be entered retroactively. This timing is not considered problematic internally. It is considered practical. Delayed documentation allows records to reflect outcomes rather than uncertainty. If a destination changes mid-transfer, the final paperwork simply reflects where the inmate ended up. If routes are altered or stops added, those details rarely appear at all. What disappears is not legality. What disappears is process. The movement happened. The inmate arrived. The record confirms that outcome. Everything in between becomes administratively irrelevant. Fragmentation across departments and facilities. Death row transfers rarely involve a single entity. They often cross multiple administrative boundaries between facilities, regions, or units within the same department. Each entity documents only its role. The sending facility records a release. The receiving facility records an intake. The transport unit records movement. No one is responsible for documenting the journey as a whole. When records are later requested, each department can truthfully say it complied with policy. Each did its job. The gap exists between systems, not within them. This fragmentation creates plausible deniability without anyone lying. Responsibility dissolves into workflow. Classification language that conceals reality. Much of the invisibility surrounding death row transfers comes down to classification language. An inmate may legally remain under a death row sentence while being physically housed elsewhere under a different administrative designation. On paper, nothing unusual has occurred. In practice, the inmate has been relocated. The transfer does not appear as a death row transfer. It appears as a housing adjustment, medical relocation, or security reassignment. The terminology is technically correct and practically misleading. This language is not designed for public understanding. It is designed for internal consistency, records that are accurate and still useless. When documentation exists, it often satisfies minimum requirements without providing clarity. Dates may be recorded without times. Locations may be listed without routes. Status changes may occur without explanation. These records are compliant. They are also opaque. Oversight bodies typically review outcomes, not processes. As long as the inmate is housed legally, security is maintained, and no incident occurs, the mechanics of movement attract little attention. Compliance replaces comprehension. Access without coherence. Even when records exist, accessing them is difficult. Data is controlled by different departments with different policies. Requests must be routed through formal channels. Responses are delayed, narrowed, or redacted. Security exemptions are invoked. Privacy rules are cited. Operational sensitivity is referenced. Transparency is not denied outright. It is fragmented until it loses coherence. By the time pieces are assembled, if they ever are, the transfer is long over. The information becomes historical rather than actionable. Why detailed records are actively avoided. From an institutional perspective, detailed documentation creates risk. Every specific explanation invites scrutiny. Every clear timeline can be challenged. Every named decision-maker becomes accountable. Ambiguity is safer. A vague record is harder to attack. A fragmented record is harder to reconstruct. A delayed record is harder to challenge. The absence of detail protects not just the institution, but the individuals working within it. The inmate's lack of access. Inmates themselves rarely receive timely access to records documenting their transfers. Requests take time. Responses are delayed. Documents arrive long after the event, if at all. By the time paperwork is seen, the opportunity to challenge the transfer has passed. The record becomes something to be archived, not contested. This reinforces the sense that movement occurs outside the inmate's control and outside their ability to document their own experience. Oversight that cannot see what isn't required. Oversight mechanisms rely on existing documentation. They confirm that required entries are present. They do not interrogate what never had to be recorded. As long as the system appears to function, there is little incentive to question its internal opacity. By this point, the system should feel complete. Death row inmates are transferred quietly. The process is deliberately unpredictable. Records are fragmented, delayed, and administratively thin. And yet, for a system that touches so many people, officers, administrators, attorneys, families, there is remarkably little public discussion about it. The question is not whether people know. The question is why knowing does not turn into speaking. Silence is the final mechanism that allows the system to function. It is not imposed by a single rule or enforced by a visible threat. It is maintained through incentives, normalization, risk calculation, and learned behavior. Silence persists because, at every level, speaking offers little reward and meaningful risk. This chapter examines how that silence is created and why it holds. Silence among correctional staff. Correctional officers and transport personnel are rarely given explicit orders not to talk about death row transfers. There is no universal gag rule. Instead, silence is built into professional culture. From early training, staff are taught that movement details are sensitive. Sensitive information is not discussed casually. It is shared only on a need-to-know basis. It is not explained outside formal channels. Over time, this becomes instinct rather than instruction. Talking about transfer procedures does not improve safety. It does not advance careers. It does not make daily work easier. But it can introduce problems, misinterpretation, media interest, internal questioning. In an environment where stability is prized, silence becomes the safest default. Transfers quickly become routine. Routine dulls awareness. What would appear extraordinary to an outsider begins to feel procedural to those who experience it regularly. When something becomes normal, it stops feeling worth mentioning. Silence follows naturally. Professional risk and institutional loyalty. Correctional systems place a high value on cohesion. Loyalty is framed as professionalism. Questioning internal practices, especially those framed as legal and authorized, can be perceived as undermining order. An officer who speaks openly about transport practices risks being labeled indiscreet or unreliable. Even without formal retaliation, informal consequences often follow. diminished trust, isolation, fewer opportunities. These signals do not need to be explained to be understood. Silence becomes a form of professional self-preservation. Importantly, most staff do not see themselves as hiding wrongdoing. From their perspective, transfers are lawful, routine, and necessary. Discussing them publicly feels unnecessary at best and harmful at worst. So they don't. Silence among administrators. For administrators, silence is strategic. Administrators are evaluated on outcomes, safety, compliance, absence of scandal. Detailed public explanations of internal processes introduce risk without offering benefit. Every explanation creates a record. Every record creates exposure. From an administrative standpoint, silence is efficiency. Transfers that occur without incident are considered successful. Success does not require visibility. It requires that nothing goes wrong. As long as that standard is met, there is no incentive to invite attention. In this context, silence is not avoidance. It is management. The cost of speaking for inmates. For inmates, silence is often a rational choice. Transfers already destabilize. Speaking about them, through grievances, letters, or testimony, rarely produces meaningful results. More often, it produces delay, skepticism, or unintended consequences. Inmates understand that challenging opaque processes is difficult without documentation. They also understand that the people evaluating their complaints are part of the same system they are challenging. Requests for information stall. Grievances move slowly. Legal filings take time. Meanwhile, daily life continues under institutional control. Silence becomes the safer option. Even when inmates do speak, their accounts are often dismissed as subjective or exaggerated. Without records to corroborate their experience, their words carry little institutional weight. Over time, many stop trying. Attorneys and strategic quiet. Defense attorneys are not unaware of death row transfer practices. Many encounter them repeatedly, but legal strategy shapes what becomes public. Transfers are difficult to challenge unless they clearly violate policy or law. They often fall within broad administrative authority. Raising objections without documentation can distract from more pressing legal battles. Appeals, evidentiary hearings, competency reviews. Attorneys must prioritize. Without a clear path to relief, pursuing transfer-related challenges can consume resources without improving outcomes. Silence, in this context, is not ignorance. It is calculation. The issue is noted internally and set aside. Families left outside the system. Families often experience the silence most acutely. A transfer occurs. Phone calls go unanswered. Letters are returned or delayed. Information arrives slowly, if at all. Families search for answers without access, authority, or leverage. They ask questions from the outside of a system designed not to respond to them. Families may contact facilities, attorneys, or oversight offices, only to encounter vague responses or procedural barriers. Each barrier is defensible. None are satisfying. Over time, families learn what the system will and will not explain. Silence becomes expected. Oversight without voice. Oversight bodies exist, but their scope is limited. Inspections focus on compliance with standards. Reports evaluate conditions at specific points in time. Oversight confirms that rules were followed, not that processes were transparent. Transfers that end without incident rarely attract scrutiny. There is no failure to investigate, no injury to explain, no public controversy to address. Silence persists because nothing triggers review. Oversight mechanisms are not designed to interrogate absence. They review what is present. Media attention and the problem of proof. Journalistic interest in prison systems often depends on documentation. Records create stories. Stories require evidence. In the case of death row transfers, evidence is fragmented by design. Without a clear paper trail, stories are difficult to substantiate. Editors hesitate. Legal departments advise caution. Investigations stall. The absence of documentation does not prove wrongdoing, but it does make scrutiny difficult. Silence survives not because no one is curious, but because curiosity alone is not enough. Silence as normalization. Perhaps the most powerful force maintaining silence is normalization. When something happens quietly, repeatedly, and without visible consequence, it becomes background. Staff stop noticing. Administrators stop explaining. Inmates stop asking. Families adjust expectations. silence stops feeling imposed. It begins to feel natural. This normalization is not the result of conspiracy. It is the result of repetition. The system's unspoken agreement. At every level, an unspoken agreement forms. Staff maintain discretion. Administrators avoid unnecessary explanation. Attorneys prioritize winnable battles. Inmates weigh risk against reward. Families are kept at a distance. Oversight focuses on compliance, not clarity. No one needs to coordinate this agreement. It emerges organically. Each participant acts in their own interest. The result is collective silence. What silence achieves? Silence protects the system from scrutiny. By now, the mechanics should be unmistakable. Death row inmates are not frozen in place. They move, quietly, irregularly, and with little public visibility. The process is not chaotic, and it is not accidental. It is structured, authorized, routine, and designed to leave as little surface evidence as possible. The transfers themselves are only one part of the story. What matters more is what they reveal about how power functions inside modern institutions. Not through force, not through secrecy, but through design. Through systems that do exactly what they are built to do, while appearing almost non-existent to those outside them. Nothing in this documentary points to a single villain. There is no hidden order, no rogue department, no dramatic cover-up waiting to be exposed. Instead, there is something far more durable, a structure that rewards silence, fragments responsibility, and treats invisibility as a sign of success. This is how systems endure. When a death row inmate is transferred without public notice, without a clear paper trail, and without explanation to the people waiting for answers, the system does not view that as a failure. It views it as efficiency. The inmate arrived. Security was maintained. No incident occurred. The institution moved forward. From inside the system, that outcome is enough. But from the outside, something is missing. Families are left searching for information that arrives too late to matter. Attorneys reconstruct timelines after the fact, if they can reconstruct them at all. Journalists encounter gaps that cannot be filled with documents. Oversight bodies review compliance without ever seeing the process that produced it. And the public, for the most part, remains unaware that movement happened at all. This is not because the public is being deliberately deceived. It is because the system was never designed to be legible from the outside. It was designed to function. When systems prioritize function over explanation, invisibility becomes a feature. Complexity replaces clarity. Routine replaces scrutiny. Silence replaces accountability. None of this requires malicious intent. Each participant acts rationally within their role. Officers protect discretion. Administrators avoid unnecessary exposure. Attorneys focus on winnable cases. Inmates calculate risk. Families are kept at arm's length. Oversight confirms compliance and moves on. No one needs to coordinate this behavior. The structure itself produces it. And once produced, it sustains itself. This is why death row transfers continue to occur in the same way they always have, quietly, lawfully, and largely unseen. Not because anyone is hiding something, but because the system has no incentive to show itself. Transparency creates questions. Questions create risk. Risk disrupts stability. So the system chooses stability. The cost of that choice is not always visible, but it is real. It appears in uncertainty, in unanswered phone calls, in delayed letters, in records that explain outcomes but never processes, in experiences that exist vividly for the people inside them and barely at all on paper. When a system functions this way long enough, silence stops feeling unusual. It becomes normal, expected, even defended. And that may be the most important point of all. Because systems that rely on silence do not collapse under scrutiny. They simply avoid it. They continue operating until something forces attention, an incident, a lawsuit, a public outcry. Until then, the machinery keeps moving, one transfer at a time, without ever needing to announce itself. This documentary did not set out to prove wrongdoing. It set out to make something visible that usually is not. To show how movement happens, how records fragment, and how silence holds everything together. What you do with that knowledge is not for this documentary to decide. But understanding how power operates when it does not need to speak is the first step toward understanding the systems that shape lives far from public view. Because the most effective systems are rarely the loudest ones. They are the ones that work quietly, efficiently, and without being noticed. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.